the nice thing about music is that it doesn't have the crass quality of the spoken word where you're directly tied to meaning. You can get to an abstract truth that might be deeper than a very political truth through music. And so it has a power in that sense.
That's Colin Jacobson. He's a violinist, composer, and co-founder of the Knights Chamber Orchestra and the string quartet Brooklyn Rider. This is Classical Gas, a podcast series produced by Classical Voice North America. I'm Gail Wine. I first met Colin Jacobson in 2004 when he was young artist in residence on NPR's Performance Today. He brought 3 other musicians to the studio with him, violinist Johnny Gondelsman, violist Nicholas Cords, and Colin's brother, cellist Eric Jacobsen. That was one of Brooklyn Rider's first performances. I spoke with Colin earlier this year about Brooklyn Rider's new concert program, Citizenship Notes, which commemorates the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. Brooklyn Rider commissioned works by Don Byron, Ted Hearn, Angelica Negron, and Jacobsen himself, which they perform alongside music by Haydn and Beethoven. So this year is Brooklyn Rider's 20th anniversary?
That's right.
That's incredible.
You knew us before we were Brooklyn Rider, right? One of the first things we did together before we had a name.
Yeah, yeah, and you guys were so great then. It's been an incredible ride, I think. Has the quartet developed in the way you expected it to 20 years ago?
Ah, that's hard to say. I mean, I guess yes, in that I feel like we've stayed true to all the things that we love to do, and those continue to animate new projects. So, the idea that we love the tradition of the quartet, in particular, actually, it's recorded history pre-World War II. Old quartets like the Capet Quartet and the Bush Quartet were early influences on how we thought about the tradition. And then, of course, the many teachers who are part of that, who were direct teachers of ours, themselves were part of Juilliard and Guarneri quartets and others, Primrose Quartet. And then I think it's the desire to widen that tent of what goes into a string quartet by collaboration, often with people outside of what we think of as the Western classical canon, and then by commissioning new work. And then, as composer in residence within Brooklyn Rider and arranger, it has been a lab and a creative cauldron to write for all these years as well. So it's yeah, and I guess all of those aspects continue to happen, and particularly in this 20th anniversary, we just have it's chock full of exciting new projects. So,
And speaking of new projects, the program you're performing at Tippet Rise in September of 2025 is a program just full of new music, celebrating the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. How did this program come about?
yeah, well, that program is called Citizenship Notes, and that's sort of the framework. And I would say that over the years, one way Brooklyn Rider has programmed old and new together is often with some kind of framework, some sort of theme. Over the years, we've had healing modes, which was inspired by the message of healing in one of Beethoven's late string quartets, and then commissioning 5 new works to go to make a program together, which, strangely timed. The album came out in around March of 2020. But actually, in a certain sense, it does feel like, even though the quartet speaks to a time aspect, I mean, string quartets and composers, but also can address the world as we see it and live it in the moment. So that I'd say healing modes was a feeling of a need for healing in the world, Four Elements, which is an album that's about to come out, was addressing issues around climate and also is mixed with rep pieces like Shostakovich and Dutilleux, but then a whole bunch of new commissions. And now the Citizenship Notes is a new program, part of our 20th anniversary, and thinking about the 250th anniversary of the country. And, you cannot represent that history or America in one program, but we did want to, address both what we think of as the very democratic roots of the string quartet and as an entity that Haydn and Beethoven pioneered in the time of revolutionary democracy in Europe and America at that time, and then voices from our time who we feel represent some of the great American values. So people like Ted Hearn, Don Byron, Angelica Negron. And then I'm contributing to this project an arrangement slash sort of fantasy on a Bob Dylan song, his famous "The Times They Are a-Changin'."
Mhm. Yeah, and I want to ask you about that. Tell me why you chose to take off on "The Times They Are a-Changin'" by Bob Dylan and what approach you took to that when creating this piece.
Well, I have not created the piece yet, so that is yet to happen. uh, I mean, I actually did arrange the song a little bit more straight up for singers with the Knights at one point. So I am, I've gotten deep inside it, but I think it's going to be a different beast for string quartet and perhaps more of a, in my mind, it will be a little bit more of a composerly homage of, and the times they are changing. In fact, like I feel like when I wrote the arrangement for singers and the Knights, I ended it on quite a very hopeful note at the time. And I feel like I will end it on a more quizzical note at this point in the trajectory of my life and our society. But I actually the Dylan is he's such a incredibly revolutionary voice, obviously, and iconoclast. I mean, in a way, a Beethoven-like character, though from a different genre completely, but has had such an outsized impact on songwriters following him, and really captured both the moment in the 60s, obviously, with that song, but also capturing something that's timeless and American. And so it felt like a good fit on this program.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the one of the other pieces that is a newly commissioned piece that you'll be playing the world premiere of is the work by Angelica Negron. Our Children Speak English and Spanish. So this is the title of this song. Tell me more about this piece and what kind of input you had into the inception of it.
Well, we haven't received it yet, so I actually can't tell you too much about it, except that Angelica is an incredibly creative person from Puerto Rico. She has worked a lot with children, so that makes sense that she's thinking of the future in that sense. And she writes incredibly beautiful music, but then she also does things experimentally with wires and making plants sing through electronics and all kinds of things. But so she's just an incredibly creative person, and her voice just seemed like a great fit on this project.
Yeah, so the description I have is, or at least from the press release, the title is derived from a patriotic song sung by school children after the Pledge of Allegiance in the early 20th century, as American authorities sought to assimilate Puerto Ricans by imposing English language education and American values. How do you feel like that? I mean, this is really a question for Angelica, but how will that manifest itself in the music, do you suppose?
It remains to be seen. I'm excited to find out. I mean, I think that there's probably something interesting there in terms of voices that are silenced or given, and through her music, given new voice, and just questions around that. I mean, I've played, for instance, Raven Chacon Pulitzer Prize winning composer from the Diné Navajo Nation, his Voiceless Mass, in which he directly addresses, all the schools that were set up to have the language of Native peoples taken away and forced to speak English and taken from their families. And, that's one of the histories of this country that is a sadder chapter, but I think that we're living in a moment where it feels like there are two sides that are just or canals that are like, very divided. And one says you cannot talk about the past in any sort of critical way. And the other one says we must, really be critical of the past. And I think, I think being critical of one's family or one's country is not an unpatriotic thing. It's a thing that allows you to move forward and love the things that are great in the country and improve upon the things that are difficult. And I think artists and musicians have a voice in helping all of that conversation, because the nice thing about music is that it doesn't have the crass quality of the spoken word where you're directly tied to meaning. You can get to an abstract truth that might be deeper than a very political truth through music, and so it has a power in that sense.
Yeah. The two other composers that you've commissioned are Don Byron and Ted Hearn. To me, Ted Hearn, his thing is writing about aspects of America and aspects of like uh, social culture and the differences thereof. Um, Maybe you can tell me a bit more about what piece you expect from him on this.
Yeah, I mean, he also is just a master of string writing and of string textures and unexpected harmonies and um, a sound that comes out of that sort of open American sound that maybe Copeland kind of invented, but then yeah, like calling that into question. So I just find his music always surprising in the moment. And then yeah, and then I would say Don Byron is someone that we met first at the American Academy in Rome. He was a composer in residence and played his piece that is I forgot the exact title, but four pieces related to Marvin Gaye,
Mhm.
And just had such an interesting way of taking that vernacular language, if you want to call it that, and then making this string quartet piece that was really very rigorous and still very groovy.
Yeah, and Don Byron is a jazz performer and composer primarily.
Clarinetist, yeah,
Clarinets,
great
yeah.
clarinetist, yeah.
Yeah, and so how does that translate to his writing for concert music?
Well, I think I mean, he has written a fair amount for quartet at this point, so he knows the quartet quite well. Um, but as a performer himself, I think he has that sense of timing of how things live on stage and how they surprise in the moment, audiences. And um, while there isn't, in the pieces I've played, there isn't improvisation, there's a very layered groove often, and a sense of translating gesture that may come from something like Marvin Gaye or someone like Marvin Gaye or his own music for jazz ensemble into string playing as well.
Yeah, yeah. And the other work that we haven't spoken about on this program is a Haydn string quartet. How does that fit in?
Haydn and Beethoven were part of revolutionary Europe when the French Revolution and the American Revolution were happening around the same time, and all these ideas were floating around, and really in musical form, I think, established an aesthetic of democracy of four co-equals. And you really hear that in the last movement of the Haydn, which is actually an old form, a fugue. But, and Beethoven in his Opus 59, number 3 quartet picks up that idea of a fugue and all voices being co-equals, and going from the Baroque time where fugue was the norm, but then going through a period where it was just melody and accompaniment. But I think they were making a statement with that sort of fugal last movement, particularly Beethoven in a way.
Mhm. It's fascinating to think about how a composer, just by the density or method of which they're writing their compositions on the score, is making social commentary.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, it would be wrong of me or it's a very hindsight view to look at Haydn perhaps that way, because he was definitely still in the service of the aristocracy. But I think that there is something to just that greater and greater independence of the voices that was reflecting a zeitgeist of the time.
Fascinating, fascinating. I can't wait for this program to happen because I think that all of this music is very significant and will have an impact going forward on your programs and on the listeners.
That's always the hope, that when we create these frameworks, that we end up playing them a bunch, and hopefully they spark conversations for audiences that last beyond the moment where we're in the room with everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Colin Jacobson, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you, Gail.
Violinist Colin Jacobson talking about the 20th anniversary season of the string quartet Brooklyn Rider and its new program of commissioned works, Citizenship Notes, which commemorates the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. The group performs the program for the first time at Tippet Rise in Montana in September, and will present it in Australia, Paris, Pittsburgh, Tulsa, New York City, and other locations in the coming season. This is Classical Gas. I'm Gail Wine, producer and host of this podcast series. Thanks for listening.